Thank you Xbox for giving me a free PC Game Pass code, which allowed me to play South of Midnight, the game whose story I'll be discussing in this video. So here's the spoiler alert. Also, spoiler alert for What Remains of Edith Finch. I'd be discussing some main plot points of that game as well. So let's begin. Have you watched Wisconsin Death Trip? It's a 1999 documentary that presents dramatized versions of bizarre events that took place in the state of Wisconsin between the years 1890 and 1900. Taken from news articles published in the local newspaper at the time, the film portrays little snippets of the unusual number of what could be boiled down to odd behavior by the residents of the area, driven by a number of factors like poverty, religious fanaticism, magical thinking, derangement, obsessive-compulsive disorder, drunkenness, depression, juvenile proclivity for delinquency, fear of old age, even weather and whatnot. The people of Black River Falls, the town the film primarily focuses on, seemingly had been living in a sort of magic realism, which makes their stories uncomfortably odd, yet at the same time irresistible. Perhaps since it contains somewhat similar kind of magic realism, albeit turned to 11 to make a video game out of it, Wisconsin Death Trip is what came to my mind first when I started playing South of Midnight. The game centers around Hazel, whose house gets swept by a massive flood right in front of her eyes, taking her mother Lacey with it. Hazel immediately jumps in a quest to find her mother and along the way discovers her hidden magical powers and uncovers deeply personal, unusually dark and charming stories of characters in her locality. It's in these side stories, let's call them, some of which are told through these holographic flashbacks, some are found through writings all over the levels, that I found a sense of deeply tragic eeriness similar to stories told in Wisconsin Death Trip. And also in the writing and minimalistic presentation of these stories, I found a level of quality that I thought the other half of the game, the gameplay part, was severely lacking. In Hazel's quest to find her mother, the first side story we get to see is that of two brothers, Benji and Rhubarb. Benji is mentally challenged, a simple-minded boy with a heart of gold who mostly remains lost in his thoughts. People around them relentlessly bully Benji for being different, which led to their mother moving them from places to places in hope that Benji would be spared these sufferings. But after moving to Prospero, the town where the game takes place, Rhubarb, Benji's brother, realizes that no matter where they go, people will always come after Benji. His brotherly protectiveness turns into frustration, which turns into anger against Benji. Rhubarb feels that in protecting Benji all his life, he has been intertwined with him in a way that would never let him live a life of his own. So one day, leading Benji to believe that they are playing a game, Rhubarb asks him to get inside a hollow tree, which Benji does without any hesitation. Rhubarb nails the tree shut and leaves. At some point, Benji realizes he's never getting out, and who knows how long he cries, till he just couldn't anymore.
Somehow the tree took pity, and somehow Benji become the tree. But he'd never forget that the brother he'd loved had done this to him.
Then there's the story of Hazel's rich grandmother, Bunny Flood, who had two kids, Hazel's dad Trey and his younger sister Cherie.
So many of her with Cherie. So few of her with Dad.
Bunny, who wasn't shy about the fact that her daughter Cherie was her favorite and that she wanted to bring her up in her own image so she could perpetuate Bunny's legacy, would never stop blaming her son Trey for the smallest of mistakes that would put Cherie in any risk. Trey tried his best to look after his sister Cherie, even though he himself was a child, and Bunny, seemingly never ready to admit her own negligence in taking care of her young daughter, always found ways to blame Trey every time Cherie's well-being was threatened. Growing increasingly fearful of his mother's scolding, Trey tried to wash his sister in the lake water when her clothes got dirty, which resulted in the tragic death of young Cherie. And that day, Trey lost both his mother and sister. Not being able to bear the pain of her favorite child's death, the ever-stubborn Bunny Bunny sought to steal the heart of the tree that had turned Benji almost immortal and put Cherie's body inside of it, hoping to someday find a way to revive her. Bunny's obsessive refusal to accept her daughter's death leads her to seek all sorts of unholy means to revive her daughter, even at the cost of surrounding her whole town with the curse of dark magic. As an audience, this puts us in a moral dilemma. Do we see Bunny as a loving mother whose love makes her incapable to deal with the reality of the loss of her child?
You have no idea what loss feels like. When Cherie drowned, I was so raw it hurt to breathe.
Or does this rejection of reality come from a deep sense of narcissism, selfishness, and jealousy that we can see signs of in Bunny's personality all throughout the game?
You used me.
I did. Why should I borrow when I can just take?
We see a parallel to Bunny's love for her child in another story told in South of Midnight, that of Ayotunde, a woman who jumped in a swamp near Prospero hoping to escape into a better life for her and her son. But in the turmoil of it, she lost the grip on her child and kept searching and searching for him, not knowing that a magical flower of this magical swamp has embraced her son to safety. Ayotunde's guilt and pain of losing her son turns her into a sea monster, and she tears the boat she leapt from apart. We find a similar sort of reckless selfishness in Bunny when we find her carving out the heart of Hugging Molly, an alleged quote-unquote witch said to be a kidnapper of children, who actually turns out to be their savior, their healer. But Bunny doesn't care about saving or healing other children, she only cares about bringing back her own daughter. So she uses Hazel to weaken Molly and steal her heart to revive Cherie. While loving mother turned sea monster Ayotunde ends up finding her long-lost son, now grown into a benevolent little monster himself, Bunny, realizing at the end of the game that even carving out Hugging Molly's heart could not bring Cherie back, comes to terms with reality and perhaps learns to accept her responsibility in the tragic death of her daughter. She should have been there for her. She should have protected her and not let a toddler alone to be protected by another young child.
I don't even know what to live for anymore.
Finally, seeing the futility of her blind hope to bring her dead daughter back, Bunny decides to go with Ryu, an illusionist who offers to take her to a land of magical reality where Bunny will be able to live with her daughter, despite knowing it is merely an illusion.
I know who you are. It won't really be her.
You'll never be able to tell the difference, I promise.
Accepting pain, especially the pain of loss of a loved one, is pretty much an impossible mountain to climb. Unable to face it head-on, we often choose some form of self-induced delusion to water down the painful realization of the fact that someone has ceased to exist. People in Prospero seem to have taken refuge in this kind of illusion, doesn't matter whether self-induced or brought on by Ryu the illusionist, in order to accept their pain and move on with their lives. Yes, these illusions have somehow manifested themselves in the material reality of the town. But if you think about it, it's really not that different from the real world, where we too often adopt illusions, embellishments, alterations, and sometimes self-soothing justifications to make the pain of loss bearable. A more grounded example of how humans embellish their memories to deal with their griefs and survivors' guilt in some cases is portrayed in What Remains of Edith Finch, a narrative masterpiece from 2017 that tells the story of the Finch family, whose members have died in bizarre, often inexplicable ways that the family explains to itself as simply a result of generational curse. But upon close inspection, we can see that the members of the Finch family were imaginative people whose deaths could very well be explained rather plainly as results of mostly negligence, ignorance, reckless behavior, or mental health issues. But throughout the game, we can see how the family chooses to remember the events of each death by putting up well-adorned shrines that dramatizes these deaths, by allowing publication of a comic book about their famous daughter's demise, which has obvious signs of having taken a lot of creative liberty, by giving giving interviews on newspapers portraying the death of a family member who died while building a dragon-shaped slide as literally death by a dragon.
When Edie told people Sven was killed by a dragon, she could also have said he was building a dragon-shaped slide that collapsed. She could have, but she didn't.
Or writing letters and journals about deaths of family members that clearly uses a lot of creative dramatization and has symptoms of unreliable narration all over them.
Maybe we believed so much in a family curse, we made it real.
While it can be interpreted in many ways as to why they choose to remember these deaths these ways, I see it as fundamentally their way to escape the pain of the rather plain, simple, raw reality of loss.
I think we've been surrounded by death for so long, we've just gotten used to it.
And also perhaps a result of a wicked obsession with the idea of a curse to excuse their negligent behavior or to preserve the reputation, or maybe we should say notoriety, as a special family. The way What Remains of Edith Finch deals with dark subject matters like death of children and familial tragedies with a sort of twisted playfulness that manages to strike a perfect balance between keeping things strangely curious, all the while not commodifying death in a way that denies its seriousness and gravity, was something very rare. And somehow South of Midnight manages to replicate it, although not as successfully, but still to a commendable extent, especially despite tonally being a very different game. Which is why, despite being absolutely bored by the repetitive combat and the general gameplay mired with every modern video game feature cliches, my time spent with the game was still quite valuable.
Sorry I woke you up, baby Sherry. You hush now. Going back to sleep, okay?
See, nothing's ever really lost.